These are just some tips on doing research since we're doing those brief assignments, those blog assignments next week, and you are going to need to find 4 articles. And I've done a lot of research in my life, and I have, I think, some pretty good tips. So I'm going to try to go quickly through these. But this is a skill that you should learn because, even when you're not in school, it can be very useful, whether you're researching, what car to buy or product reviews, or you want to get involved in some kind of DIY project, or you're learning something new for your work world. Knowing how to do research can prove completely invaluable. So, to start off, I want to talk a little bit about there's a difference between what's called a secondary source and a primary source. A secondary source is one that's reporting on research. So in the blog video, I use the example of like the USA Today reporting on a scholarly study, right? It's secondary, right? It didn't do the study. USA Today didn't do the study, but it's reporting on the study. It's summarizing the study. It's writing an article about the study. So what we're looking for is primary sources, right? We want to find the study itself. We want to go to the source itself and not just the secondary source, right? Because the secondary source is often not as qualified. They're often don't understand the issue as well. Um, and also, you can begin with secondary sources. It's a real good place to start, I feel. You can go find that USA Today article, and then, it'll point you to the scholarly article. So it's a good place to start to make sure you're finding good sources, and because they've already done some of that work for you. But when we're posting on the blogs and we're using them in our debates, it's going to be a much stronger source when you have a primary source. Um, what are reasons to do research? Again, besides what I said earlier about kind of the lifelong skill and this being invaluable in so many areas of your life, I think the one main reason that scholars do research is to enter into a conversation, right? We're not an island. Any ideas we have, it's very likely that someone else has had those ideas before. And people are talking about those ideas. So there's a conversation going on out there about, the topic that you're researching. And so, one of the reasons to do research is so you know what other people have said and so that you can enter into that conversation. So you're not jumping in to the conversation saying something that has already been said a bunch of times or saying something that people have already shown isn't correct, right? It's like that annoying person at a party who butts into a conversation and is kind of a know-it-all about it when they don't have any idea of what had been said before in the conversation, right? So doing research helps you enter into a conversation. It also, helps you learn because, we learn from one another. We borrow ideas from one another. We build on ideas from one another. Doing the research can also demonstrate to others what you have learned and that you know what you're talking about. Um, it's also a great way to generate ideas. Oftentimes when I'm writing and researching, I'll read someone else's work, and their idea will spark a new thought in me, right? Not the same as their thought. Maybe it's more related to my own research. But I learn so much from others, and not just what they say, but it also sparks kind of new connections in my brain that create new ideas. Um, and it also helps you position your argument, right? There's this conversation out there, there's this world. Some people, for instance, are kind of positive about digital media, some people are more negative about digital media. And so when you do research, you can position yourself in relation to those arguments that are out there. Which team are you on? Which arguments do you agree with? Which arguments do you disagree with? Typically, there's kind of a source hierarchy that is, you can kind of trust certain sources more than other sources. The first and kind of top of the hierarchy are books, especially academically published books, because these are longer. They generally have more research that goes into them. They generally undergo more review. Um, Followed by that is journal articles. I'm talking about those articles that are, anywhere between like 10 and 30 pages or something like that. Maybe you read a lot of these for your classes and such. And these, again, they also go through more review. They also have, citations at the bottom, so they've done more research to back them up. And they tend to be written by people with qualifications to publish in those journals. Um, there's something similar to journal articles that are called like think tank or organization reports and studies. Typically, if you see something that's .org, a lot of times what those places do is they hire researchers or they hire scholars to do reports and to gather data. And so those are just as scholarly as journal articles oftentimes. Now, with the caveat that you should do at least a quick Google search into what the organization is or who the organization is, because there are some organizations that sound, at least in their name, like they're highly credible, but that are, when you do a little research, you find out like, oh, this organization that says climate change is a hoax is completely funded by ExxonMobil. And then maybe you'll know that that's not the most trustworthy source. Um, but a lot of these are nonprofit organizations, and a lot of them do good research. Um, the next thing down is sort of like long form journalism. That is like news magazine pieces, things like the Atlantic or the Nation or Newsweek, etc., and or investigative pieces like Politico or sometimes the New York Times, etc., do these. So they'll be longer than just a typical newspaper article, and they are doing original research oftentimes, or they're soliciting the opinion of someone who has high qualifications. So these are quality sources as well. Below that's just like regular newspaper articles or opinion pieces. Oftentimes these are short. Their purpose is more to convey information or convey an opinion than it is to do research and to back up that opinion or information with original research. So they can be useful as information pieces, who, what, when, where, and why. You can learn about an issue that way. But they're often not very useful in debates because they're not taking a stance, and they're not. That stance is often just an opinion and not based in research. Now there are a lot of blogs and other things you can find online. Sometimes they look like they're very professional, and sometimes they can be. Like academics often blog about their research and stuff. So these can be useful. They can be highly suspect. And the issue that you need to do is check on who this person is, who this blog is. Do a little googling about that in order to determine whether it's a high quality source or not. Why should we use scholarly sources? I'm not just saying this because I am a scholar, but that there are things that are built into the research process at universities and think tanks and such that ensure that they are more credible and higher quality. Oftentimes, the articles are longer. They cite other research, so they're more in depth. Again, this is primary research and not just secondary research. A lot of the opinion pieces and such that you find out there that hasn't gone through the scholarly process has a lot of bias in it. I mentioned the ExxonMobil example. Oftentimes you'll see opinion pieces, in newspapers, etc., that come from political leaders or whatever. And obviously they have an interest in getting you to believe one side or not, whether it be money or political power or whatever. The interesting thing about academic articles is, scholars want to get their stuff published, but whether they publish on one side of the issue or the other side of the issue, whether their research says, yeah, this is true, or no, it didn't really work out, it doesn't matter for their success. Both count equally as a publication. And so therefore, scholars sort of have less built-in incentive to be biased. We also don't get paid by the journals that we publish in, and we don't get paid, because one team rallies to our argument or another. And so, again, some less bias. Not to say that scholars don't have their own biases, uh, but they're not monetary biases and they're not political power biases. There's also qualifications. Scholars spend years studying these issues, getting degrees, being tested by other scholars, being reviewed by other scholars, and so they tend to have more of an expertise in these areas. Um, and academic journal articles go through what's called a peer review process. If you haven't ever heard of this before, in order to get published in an academic journal, you submit the article and it's sent out to two, sometimes three reviewers who don't know who you are and you don't know who they are. It's called blind peer review. And the blind part is to make sure that personal biases don't come into play. And those reviewers, based in will be experts in the area, and based in their expertise, they give recommendations on whether it should be published or revised. Oftentimes, you have to revise it and submit it back. And so that peer review process, is a way to check against bias, is a way to make sure that the quality of the sources is very high. So how do we spot scholarly sources? First thing you can look for is the qualifications of the author. If the author works for one of these organizations or is a scholar, then that's a pretty good clue that it's a scholarly source. Length is another clue. Typically, scholarly articles are going to be longer. They're going to be book length. They're going to be journal article length, that kind of thing. Scholars also are required to cite their sources to enter into that conversation, right, and to back up their research. So there would typically be lots of footnotes or endnotes in a scholarly source. The name of the journal can be a good giveaway as well. If it says Journal of Advanced something something Studies, that sounds scholarly, right? If it says something like Newsweek, that sounds more like a news source. On a lot of the search engines, if you look, for instance, on EBSCO and Communication Database, those databases, there's a little button on, if you do advanced search, there's a little button on the left that it says, you click it, it says search scholarly sources only. And so that's a good way to make sure you're finding scholarly sources. Speaking of those search engines, there are a couple that I recommend. Academic Search Premier, i.e. EBSCO. If you go to the library webpage and click databases, and then search under A, you'll see this at Academic Search Premier. That one's sort of like all of the scholarly journals that the university has access to. There's a subset of that one that's called Communication and Mass Media Complete. So click the C and you'll find that one. And that one just has communication journals. JSTOR is another good one for communication and social science research. And then just Google Scholar itself. If you type in Google Scholar into a Google search engine, you'll get a link to a search engine that searches only scholarly sources. Now with this one, oftentimes you would have to find the source and then go back to our library page to find the actual article because they're often behind paywalls and such like that. But it's a good place to get some scholarly sources as well. So how do we do searches when we're doing research? I think one of the things people do wrong with research is they just kind of grab the first article that pops up when they type in some search terms. And oftentimes the first article isn't exactly what you want or the best or most useful article. So try to research in waves, right? Skim the abstracts, skim the titles until you find something that you're like, yeah, that's exactly what I want, right? And so oftentimes you might start off going broad, social media and activism. And then as you find a particular author or you find a particular keyword that everyone seems to be using, or you find a particular key movement, like, oh, Black Lives Matter used social media a lot, then you can narrow your search and you'll find more useful articles. So now I'm going to search for social media, Black Lives Matter, and activism, and that'll give me even more useful articles. You can also follow the Library of Congress subject headings. So if you're doing a search, right? I just pulled up one of the books that I wrote here. And if you're doing a search and you find a book that's really good or whatever in the library, you see these subject headings. These are going to give you, you know, other books on the same topic. So I'm interested in animation, so I click this, and then it'll take you directly to animated films and all of the different books that we have at our library on animated films. Um, Again, as you're doing searches, you're trying to get narrower so you find more specific and better stuff. So look for specific keywords. If you see a term or a concept that keeps coming up, for me, one of the things that I research a lot is called affect, which is about emotion and the way media affects our emotion and stuff. So then I start doing searches using that keyword, affect. Or authors, like if you see everyone citing the same author a lot, just do an author search for that author's work, and you'll find some good sources. Also, when you're typing in a search into Google, if you want to find out, like, the article that specifically used this quote, put it in quotation marks, and it will search for only that phrase or only that quote specifically. When you're doing searches, cut generic words like who, the, etc. Again, look for specific words and more concrete words, because those kinds of words, especially on Google, are going to give you a lot of random hits. And if you're looking for more than one search word, say you want to look for affect and social media and activism, you can use what are called Boolean connectors. So if you put the word "and" between them, then it'll look for all three of those words. If you put the word "not" before something and then put it in quotation marks, say I want to find stuff on activism, but I don't want any more on Black Lives Matter. I've got way too much about that. I might write social media and activism, but not, and then quotation marks, Black Lives Matter. And then that'll just show me the articles that aren't about Black Lives Matter, right? One thing here I kind of mentioned already, but I think a great place to start is not with scholarly sources. Scholarly sources can often be a little confusing. It takes some time for them to make their point because they're so careful and they're backing up everything with literature and research. And so sometimes I think a better place to start is just regular old Google, and try to find some of those secondary sources that are using or citing scholarly sources, right? Because what that'll do is make sure that, by reading the summary from the secondary source, you'll know for sure that the scholarly source is exactly on the topic that you're looking for. Another good key, and this is really useful for your book here, for the Lindgren book, is follow the footnotes, right? Say you find one article and it mentions a couple of things that you were wanting to use, but the whole article is not really about that. Oftentimes there'll be a footnote or an endnote, or a citation of some kind that they, have in the article. So go find that citation instead. And with our book, he has a lot of citations as he's mentioning different debates and different articles and stuff. Just that's a great place to start, and is probably the best research tip I can teach you is, Lindgren is this a textbook, so he's not taking a stance, but the articles that he's citing are taking a stance. So if you find something interesting in one of those, go get that article, go get that book, and cite that instead. The library is a great resource for you. There's a thing called OhioLink and Internet Library Loan. If you can't find the article in our library, but you think it's really useful, go to OhioLink or go to Interlibrary Loan tabs on the library page, and request that article, and they'll scan it and send it to you, usually in a day or two. So that's a good resource for you. The reference librarians in our library, there's one that's in charge of communication. So if you do a search on the library page for reference librarians communication, her email will come up, and you can email her. That's her job, and you can say, hey, I'm looking for research into X, Y, or Z. Can you find some sources for me that are in our library? And she, it might take her a day or two, but she'll get back to you. Um, and the library has some great study spaces, some great electronic resources. It has a Starbucks now. So if you've never been there, I encourage you to go check it out. Reading tips here. How do you read to make, as you're, uh, doing your research? Again, read looking for the main points. Try to identify the claim. Usually the claim will be one of the first two sentences of each paragraph, but that really depends on sort of how clear and good a writer is. Sometimes they're not that clear and not that good. So, try to underline the claims. What that'll do is it'll make it so that when you reread it and you go back to do your research to put together your debate case, you can kind of quickly skim and just read the parts you underlined and have a reminder of what was in that article. Also, take margin notes. You see here, this is too many margin notes. But when you find something really good or important for an advantage you're working on, say it's activism again, write out on the side activism. If there's a quote that you want to use, I will just write like a Q out next to it on the side. If it's something you want to use for your brief and look into research, write B out to the side. Again, this just makes it so much easier when you go back through to find the briefs, to find the quotes, to find the sources, to find the main claims, and that will save you time as you're creating your debate cases. All right. I hope this wasn't too long. I do think this is an important skill for you to learn, and it will help you a lot with the blog assignments and with your debates. So have a good rest of your day.